Trump just authorized the deployment of the 82nd Airborne Division to an undisclosed location in Eastern Europe. The announcement came without warning. No press briefing, no formal statement from the Pentagon, just a single line buried in a Department of Defense logistics update that most journalists missed entirely. The 82nd Airborne is not a peacekeeping force. It is a rapid deployment strike division designed for immediate combat insertion. When they move, something serious is already happening. And right now, they are moving fast. Multiple intelligence sources confirm paratroopers from Fort Liberty began loading transport aircraft 72 hours ago. Destination coordinates remain classified. Host nation permissions have not been publicly disclosed. But flight tracking data shows a steady stream of C-17 Globemaster transports crossing into Polish and Romanian airspace since Monday morning. Most people think this is a routine NATO rotation exercise. In reality, this is the largest unannounced combat-ready deployment to the European theater since the opening weeks of the Ukraine war. In the next couple of minutes, I will show you exactly where these troops are going, what mission parameters they are operating under, and why 3 allied governments are refusing to confirm their presence on the ground. Quick, before we continue, thanks a lot for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this show going, and I appreciate you watching. Please make sure you are subscribed and like the video so more people get to see this. Now, let us get to it. The 82nd Airborne Division has not deployed at full brigade strength outside of scheduled exercises since 2022. That deployment was to Poland in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It was announced publicly. It was coordinated with Warsaw weeks in advance. Press was embedded. The entire operation was transparent. This one is not. The difference matters because the 82nd operates under what the Pentagon calls Global Response Force Protocols. That designation means they can be wheels up within 18 hours of mission authorization. They do not wait for diplomatic clearance. They do not wait for host nation parliament votes. They move first, and the paperwork follows. That is the entire point of the unit. But it also means that when they deploy without public notice, they are deploying into a situation where speed matters more than optics. You need to understand what that implies. It implies that someone at the executive level determined that surprise and operational security outweighed the political risk of keeping Congress and the press in the dark. It implies that whatever mission they are tasked with requires them to be in position before an adversary can react. And it implies that the threat assessment driving this decision is severe enough to override normal transparency protocols. Flight tracking data tells you most of what you need to know. Between March 22 and March 25, at least 14 C-17 Globemaster III heavy transport aircraft departed Fort Liberty, North Carolina, on transatlantic headings. Each C-17 can carry 102 fully equipped paratroopers, or 77,000 pounds of cargo. Do the math. That is north of 1,400 personnel in the air simultaneously, not counting advance teams, logistics support, or follow-on rotations. The flights did not file civilian flight plans. They operated on military transponders that went dark over the Atlantic and reappeared only after entering European airspace. Standard operational security for sensitive deployments. But here is where it gets strange. None of the aircraft landed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, which is the standard logistical hub for all U.S. troop movements into Eastern Europe. None landed at the major NATO facilities in Poland that hosted the 82nd during the 2022 deployment. Instead, every tracked flight either disappeared from radar over Romania or continued east toward the Baltics. Romanian officials have refused to comment. The Lithuanian Ministry of Defense issued a 2-sentence statement saying only that they are in full cooperation with NATO allies and cannot disclose details of ongoing operations. That is diplomatic code for, yes, they are here, and no, we cannot talk about it. Latvia and Estonia have said nothing at all. Poland, which has been the most vocal NATO member on frontline security, has also gone silent. That silence is not accidental, it is coordinated. The 82nd Airborne operates in brigade combat teams. A single BCT includes roughly 3,500 soldiers organized into infantry battalions, artillery units, reconnaissance platoons, and combat support elements. If the current deployment matches the flight data, we are looking at least 1 full BCT on the ground right now, possibly 2. Each BCT requires significant forward logistical infrastructure to operate. That means fuel depots, ammunition storage, medical facilities, and command and control nodes. You do not airlift that infrastructure in 72 hours unless it was already pre-positioned. And that is exactly what multiple defense analysts are now confirming. Between January and March of this year, the U.S. quietly expanded its pre-positioning stock program in Eastern Europe. Officially, this was described as routine modernization of equipment caches under the European Deterrence Initiative. In practice, it meant moving Stryker armored vehicles, M777 howitzers, Javelin anti-tank systems, and enough small arms ammunition to sustain battalion-level combat operations for 30 days into hardened storage facilities in Romania, the Baltics, and eastern Poland. None of this made headline news. It was buried in budget reconciliation documents and quarterly logistics reports. But it created the exact conditions necessary to receive and operationalize a rapid airborne insertion without waiting weeks for a logistics buildup. The infrastructure was already there. The troops just walked into it. This is not the first time the United States has used the 82nd Airborne as a tripwire force in Europe. In 1961, President Kennedy deployed elements of the division to West Germany during the Berlin crisis as a signal to Moscow that any move on the city would trigger immediate American military response. In 1990, paratroopers from the 82nd were among the first U.S. forces into Saudi Arabia during Desert Shield, deployed specifically because they could arrive faster than mechanized divisions. The pattern is consistent. When Washington needs boots on the ground immediately, and when the goal is to establish a defensive posture before an adversary can consolidate gains, the 82nd goes first. They are not designed to win wars alone. They are designed to hold ground until heavier forces arrive. That is their doctrinal purpose. And that is what makes this deployment so concerning. Because if the 82nd is being positioned as a tripwire, the question you have to ask is, what line are they being positioned to defend? And more importantly, what does the White House believe is about to cross it? Here's what nobody in Washington wants to admit publicly. Russian forces have been conducting large-scale exercises within 30 kilometers of the Lithuanian border since mid-February. Belarusian troops have massed in staging areas near Hrodna, directly adjacent to the Suwalki Gap, the 65-kilometer stretch of Polish-Lithuanian border that is the only land corridor connecting the Baltic states to the rest of NATO. If that corridor is severed, the Baltics are isolated. And if the Baltics are isolated, NATO faces an existential decision: abandon 3 member states or fight through Russian and Belarusian forces to reopen the corridor. That is not a theoretical scenario. That is a war game the Pentagon has run dozens of times. And in almost every iteration, NATO loses the corridor in the first 72 hours, unless credible combat forces are already positioned inside the gap when hostilities begin. Most people think the Suwalki Gap is just a geographic curiosity. In reality, it is the single most dangerous piece of ground in Europe. It is where NATO's credibility lives or dies. And right now, American paratroopers are either inside it or within minutes of it. That is not posturing, that is a commitment. And commitments come with costs. 3 NATO members are now hosting undisclosed numbers of American rapid reaction forces without publicly acknowledging it. That creates a dangerous information vacuum. Russia knows the troops are there. Satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human sources inside host nations make operational secrecy impossible at that scale. But because no government will confirm the deployment officially, Moscow is free to interpret it however it wants. And the interpretation that serves Russian strategic interests is the one that frames this as NATO aggression, as encroachment, as proof that the West is preparing for offensive operations. That narrative is already circulating in Russian state media. It is being amplified on Telegram channels linked to military intelligence. It is being used to justify further mobilization, further forward positioning of tactical units, further escalation. Meanwhile, European publics have no idea this is happening. German voters do not know. French voters do not know. Even American voters, who are theoretically funding this operation, were not told. That disconnect between what governments are doing and what populations are being told creates a situation where escalation can spiral faster than democratic accountability can react. You go to bed thinking everything is stable. You wake up to find that your country is already committed to a fight it never voted for. That is not hypothetical. That is how wars start in the modern era, quietly, incrementally, with just enough secrecy to prevent debate until the decision is already irreversible. So where does that leave us? We have American paratroopers on the ground in Eastern Europe under operational security protocols that suggest imminent threat. We have host governments refusing to acknowledge their presence. We have Russian forces postured in exactly the positions you would expect if they were preparing to test NATO's willingness to defend the Baltics. And we have a media environment that is either unaware or uninterested in the gap between what is happening and what is being reported. The Trump administration has made a calculated decision to prioritize speed and surprise over transparency. That decision makes tactical sense if you believe the threat is real and immediate, but it also eliminates the opportunity for public deliberation, congressional oversight, and allied consensus building. It replaces policy debate with fait accompli. And once troops are on the ground, once they are in contact, once the tripwire is set, the option to de-escalate without looking weak disappears. That is the logic of deterrence. It works until it does not. And when it does not, you are already at war. Thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate your support. Join the discussion in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think the deployment of the 82nd Airborne to Eastern Europe without public announcement was justified, given the threat environment? Or does this represent a dangerous escalation of executive military authority without sufficient democratic oversight? Let me know. Please subscribe and like the video if you want to stay updated. And click the video on the screen to see another. I will see you soon. This is not a training exercise with an exit ramp. This is a commitment with a tripwire attached. And tripwires do not ask permission before they detonate.